I believe I have the upper canopy ready to install. Have to wait for the front up here. Some of that filler needs to dry up a little bit more, and then I'll nitrate it. At the same time, any other nitrating that I want to get done underneath the canopy itself, run the cabanes and that, I'll get that finished. And it's basically ready to install on the fuselage. This particular canopy is a fairly easy canopy. This would be my first plastic one that I've installed, because I keep putting off the Bonanza. But I'll show you the difference between the two and why the Bonanza is taking me so long. I got, you buff all the glaze off of that thing. Anywhere you're going to have glue contact or paint contact. So the outside of it is completely buffed down with 150 sandpaper. Inside around the glue areas are all buffed out. That way your glue and everything can adhere to the plastic. Now, as for the cockpit area, once the cockpit is complete, or once the canopy's on, then the cockpit itself has another inset that's going to go inside of that. But what it actually is they're cutouts. You can get a good view of that. They're cutouts that are going to imitate the outer portion of the cockpit. Going to give it some detail. And then there'll be a cutout cover for the forward cockpit. It's a dual cockpit biplane, but there's going to be a simulated cover over the front hole to give it the illusion that it's actually closed up. And then there is a clear cockpit windshield that's going to go on there as well. So that's about as far as detail as this one's going to get. But I'll show you the Bonanza and show you the difference of the two. This has no glass, and you're about to see one that's got all glass. Bonanza, you can see a lot of glass there. Again, this model here is about 4 years in the making, but it's got pretty much everything on it. So I'm in no rush to, it's going to be my Cadillac of airplanes. I'm in no rush to finish it. I want to do some interior cockpit detail, and this will be the first one I've ever accomplished that on. So I use a lot of other things for guinea pigs. Well, anyway, this particular type of canopy is all glass, and the very first set that I did on this was my very first plastic canopy trying. I use CA glue on the glass, and as CA cures, it hazes, which I've done to a lot of other things as well. Don't use CA. CA, as it cures it, it'll trash your glass. I just totally trashed my first set just with CA alone, and that's unfortunate because the very first set of glass was the original glass, and it was smoked glass. It was nice, and I could smoke this, I guess, if I wanted, with using dyes, but the hell with it now. I'm just gonna, I don't know, at the time this thing goes together, I might end up smoking it, but I doubt it. It looked a lot prettier, original-wise. Well, anyway, I haven't glued this one on yet because of the fact that I got kind of chicken. Plus, I just got the glass, and this is my third shot at doing the glass. This one came out. If I can quit handling it, quit playing with it, so I don't scratch it, it should come out to be a real pretty model. You can see from the backside on this particular model. Again, I have full inboard flaps, outboard aileron, and you can see it's laying on its belly, but it's got retractable landing gear underneath it. Full elevator, full rudder, and it's going to have a pretty nice cockpit inside if I can get it, if I can do it. But anyway, that's an example of one with glass. I've done one with a lot of glass. You can see there's dust on it too, and it's probably going to end up scratching a little bit. You can see I don't have the canopy on this one. This is going to have the very same kind of closed cowling I was bringing up earlier about the engine. It's going to be a closed cowling. Here's the cowling for this. Anyway, that makes it look a lot more. See, that's closed cowling, so your muffler and everything's going to have to be inside. Gives a Bonanza a whole new look. Gives it a completed look. Well, the Skybolt's going to have the same kind of canopy, so again, I'm going to practice on the Skybolt before I do this. But this is getting to be simpler and simpler, where I'm not so afraid to finish this Bonanza anymore. I think this Bonanza is not too far off from being completed. As soon as I can score myself a helicopter radio, I believe, because this is going to take up 6 to 7 channels. Now, I have a 6th channel. If I want to play anything anywhere beyond that, then you know. In the tail flight controls, rudder and elevator. That's pretty much all that's left to do on the tail. But when you put together a tail, you want to round out a lot of your edges. Depends on the model on how you want to round it out. Generally, it's just like a half round situation. Some are V-cut, some are like my ailerons. When I go ahead and do my wing ailerons, they're going to be like a triangular cut. I'll show you that when I get to that point. Pretty much all you got to do with most tail surfaces, if I can get a decent shot of this, just draw a line. Probably not getting a... Draw a line halfway around, or at the halfway point, on all the areas that you want to sand down. And that's just simply it. Just draw halfway around, and then sand at an angle from side to side. Just by sanding at an angle, get yourself you get a feel for it. And just round that off down to the line, flip it over, do the same thing. Then you end up with a half round surface. And this here in particular happens to be the rudder. If that gives you a good shot of that. Yeah. Okay, now all I got to do now is my elevators. Do the same thing to the elevators. Hook them up in the center. Elevators hook up with a wire together, that way they stay together. And the tail's pretty much, that's it for that. And I'm just about to start going into rigging, I think. So that's pretty much for the tail. Tails are simple. Depends on the tail though. Tails can be a little more difficult than that. Like the Bonanza tail, now it's got more of an aerodynamic camber to it. It's got just got a camber to it, where this tail is a flat wing. I mean, you can put a ruler on it and it's flat all the way across. I'll show you what I mean. Just a flat stabilizer, solid balsa. The Bonanza's got a camber to it. So does the vertical. It's got a camber to it. Makes it a little more aerobatic. That's why the Bonanza hasn't flown yet, and that's why the Bonanza is taking as long as it is, because it's probably the most aerodynamic airplane I do have versus this Skybolt. Now this Skybolt, being a biplane, is going to snap on a dime. So I should be able to work myself into the Bonanza, and then I won't be so afraid to fly the Bonanza, or so afraid to crash it either. And before I move on from the tail, haven't finished the elevators yet, but I did show you the rudder. One thing I do have to keep in mind, and I just thought about this after I shut off the camera. This is a tail dragger. At one point or some point, I'm going to do fabric hinges on this, so it's going to get a little hairy around the covering part. But at some point here, I'm going to have to tie the tail wheel into the rudder situation in the tail there. Because the tail wheel, when you put a tail wheel on, unless you mount it directly into the rudder, you can have that option. I know a couple of airplanes that have that, and you land too hard on your tail, you're going to tail your rudder right off. So you don't want to put your landing load on your flight controls. So when this rudder gets put on, I got a bracket that's going to go on the bottom here. Then I'm going to have to tie. There's going to be an axle point, but I'm going to. The wheel keeps falling off here. Anyway, the tail wheel is going to tie into the rudder. That way, when you use rudder on the ground, just like nose wheel steering is hooked up to the rudder as well. They're tied into the same servo. So on a tail dragger, when you steer your rudder on the ground, you're steering your tail wheel, which taxis you around. Pretty simplistic. But I'm going to have to bend. The tricky part is I'm going to have to bend the music wire that's part of the landing gear, bend it so it bends into the rudder to tie it together. So when I go to cover this, I'm going to have to keep all of that in mind, so the rudder might end up being hinged with hinges at that point. Maybe the lower portion will be a hinge, the upper portion will be fabric, maybe the whole thing will be hinges. I'll decide that when I get to that point. But you got to kind of keep in perspective of being a tail dragger. You're going to have to tie your tail wheel in there somehow.